So I will go ahead and officially introduce us. So my name is Court McCracken, and I work here at Get Connected by Galaxy Digital in the creative communications and outreach capacity. So that's why I get the joy of sort of creating community experiences like this. If you're not familiar with us, Get Connected is our best-in-class volunteer management software serving thousands of organizations across North America and designed specifically to meet the needs of volunteer managers and their volunteer programs. Today, we have a special panel featuring Elizabeth Donovan. Elizabeth is the head of our Get Connected Network team, and Elizabeth brings her years of experience working with nonprofits as well as state organizations to implement tools that support sustainable programming. She's responsible for connecting communities through technology and relationships here at Get Connected. We also have our special guest, Beth Ashton, who I'm extremely pleased is joining us today. Beth is a Get Connected onboarding specialist here, bringing her years of experience as a volunteer manager. Beth comes to us today to share more about implementing systems and practices that amplify programs, increase volunteer engagement, and volunteer training in supporting your recruitment efforts. She's passionate about supporting volunteer professionals and leveraging technology tools to strengthen community partnerships and make volunteerism exciting and accessible for everyone. We also have Nate Barnes from our Get Connected Networks team. Nate is joining us to manage the chat box where you can ask questions. And it's always our goal to work together to keep this a healthy and respectful space that's supportive of everyone in attendance. We've got folks here who are brand new to volunteer management and those who've been doing this for a while. So some things we mentioned might be brand new or some things perhaps you've heard of before, but we'll all work together to sort of keep this a space where everyone feels uplifted and is gaining from this. So again, before we get started with our slideshow, I just want to say, we know that your jobs are incredibly busy and important and challenging, and coordinating all of your efforts involves a lot of communication for your current support base and prospective recruits. So we just want to say thank you so much for choosing to spend time with us today. Your time is incredibly valuable. So with that, I'll go ahead and do the magical slideshow presentation. All right. So we've got volunteer recruitment, current trends, challenges, and solutions. What we'll cover today is the current trends in volunteer recruitment. We know that a lot has changed in the last 2 years since the pandemic, and so we just want to get a good lay of the land here. We want to talk about solutions for the most pressing recruitment challenges, and we know there's a lot. So we really want to make sure we spend the most time there focused on the solutions. And then we hopefully will have a little time at the end for some Q&A with our guest panelist, Beth Ashton. So stay to the end for the practical tips for volunteer recruitment. Some of the topics we hope to cover are what is happening in the changing landscape of recruitment, and how can volunteer managers use communications effectively? That's a big one that we hear a lot about from our network. And what tools and practices are needed for volunteer recruitment? So one of the core roles within a volunteer program is volunteer recruitment. It is something that we hear our network talk about a lot. And so just to start off on the same, definition, volunteer recruitment is attracting and screening candidates for volunteer service. It's often filling very specific positions or growing and maintaining a pool of available volunteers that you can call upon. Here's some fun facts about volunteerism, volunteering by the numbers. As of January of 2022, this year, 56% of Americans reported that they volunteered time to a charitable or religious organization. And volunteers, it's estimated with the calculations of hours and also the average value of a volunteer hour that over $200 billion worth of hours are donated by volunteers annually. And that's growing. Here's some other fun statistics. Volunteers are actually 10 times more likely to make donations. This stat was provided by a study that was done by Fidelity Charitable and Volunteer Match in collaboration. They say that 67% of volunteers report making donations to the organizations where they volunteer their time. which is a really fascinating sort of way of thinking about this person coming into your organization and being a supporter in a variety of ways. And we'll talk more about that later. So, we're all here because we know the value of volunteers. We know the value of your program. And volunteers are often supporting critical programs or delivering these frontline services, as we were talking about earlier in the chat. These are very important people to you and your organization and the people who are really receiving these services and this connection that's on the other side of that volunteer recruitment, right? When we actually get to that place where people are connected. So I'll go ahead and start turning this over to Beth and Elizabeth to speak to this, because one of the great places to start when thinking about volunteer recruitment is, what am I really trying to do? What's my ideal outcome? So I'll go ahead and turn that over to you.
I think one of the things that always comes to mind when I think about outcome is goal. And some of the slides that you just shared, Court, like you think about what is the goal, and is everyone in your organization on the same page when it comes to what is the goal of what you're doing? I think that one with donations is one that we all kind of, it catches our eye. These people are going to be so valuable, but is our goal to catch them in volunteerism and pass them over to becoming donors, and that's where they'll live with my organization? Or is the goal a little more realistic? And I think as we talked in some previous sessions, we've been talking about, what is that life cycle of a volunteer? How do they start as a volunteer? Maybe become a donor, maybe then transition back to a volunteer, because our volunteers have changing lives just like we do. I know I was sharing with the group earlier when we were discussing this topic, depending on how much time I have, my donations go up when my time goes down. But when I've spent a lot of time, then that's what I start to heftily, think about the value of the time I'm giving. So I think, Beth, that's one of the questions I have for you, just as you kind of saw your volunteers age with your program. What were the things you saw change from like when you first met them to when they hit some of those lifestyle markers, and what did you just see?
Yeah, absolutely, Elizabeth. And what I find really important for organizations to do when they are able is to have a spectrum of opportunities for folks to connect with. Some people are going to come in right away and say, I am here. I want to make over a year or more commitment to you. I'm so excited. I have these wonderful skill sets. Help me find my match. And other folks may come in and it might be their first time volunteering. They might just be dipping their toe into that, and kind of maybe they're new to the community, finding ways to connect and taking a chance with your organization to see if that's the right fit for them. What I do love about that, and bringing again that spectrum of volunteerism, is that the more folks start to feel connected with your organization, the hope is that they start looking to further that engagement. And maybe we'll go from a one-time volunteer to one of your most regular volunteers, who is then, engaging with staff further, they're engaging with other volunteers. So I really think it's a joy to see that additional engagement when that folks are really feeling invested in as a volunteer.
That's one of the interesting parts too, is because I think that the challenge is, how do you have something that welcomes in a front door that person who's like, I am here for a year. I want to invest my skill sets in your organization and show up 4 times a week, but also not scare off that person that literally just wants to figure out, what do you do? And am I going to have fun doing it with you? And is it going to actually meet what I'm trying to change in my community or in my life? They're there not because of a paycheck. They're there because of a shared passion for the service or cause you're working on. So I know one of the things we've talked a little bit about are just, how do you make that first timers experience be light, where the goal isn't to grill them to find out everything they could possibly do for you. It's to see how I can get them to understand a little bit more of what I do, to figure out if we're a match for each other. Because coming back to work on a cause and returning to work on that cause, that's why they're there. They're not there for a paycheck. They want to see progress toward a goal with a cause or community they care about. So I know one of the things, Court, I think you were actually talking about, like one of the organizations that you serve with is that day on the farm, is kind of that very low impact, but very high touch. You come out, experience what we do, and that's how you kind of get those newbies onto the property. Is that one you can share a little bit more about? Because I love that as an analogy.
Yeah, I will say an organization I spend the majority of my volunteerism hours with, we do a monthly day on the farm. And I would say the focus, like when I'm thinking about what's the ideal outcome, this is a community building experience. Some people that attend are seasoned volunteers who are there week in and week out. And some people, they're brand new and they're just trying to become familiar with the organization and what it is that we do. And so I would say our outcome for that is community building. Our outcome for that is people feeling like our organization is accessible to them. Our outcome for that is people kind of understanding a little more what it looks like to really volunteer on a nonprofit farm and what kind of programming we have. So they get a little taste of everything. And it's really not necessarily about all the big projects getting done, although there might be a small group of people who do focus on a big project. The broader sort of outcome for that is really community building and exposure so that people can kind of get to know and get familiar. Some of those people do turn into long-term recurring volunteers. Some of those people might become like a pro bono volunteer because they might say, oh, I have skills in marketing or something like that. And so it's actually really interesting to see how, you know, just a regular monthly event like that can actually have a lot of different outcomes for volunteer recruitment. But ultimately, we know that it's a community building exercise, and it's a lot of fun and there's a lot of people and a lot of stuff going on. But it's not necessarily like a targeted, you know, recruitment effort.
I loved what you shared before too, Court, because you were like, the projects don't get done. Like the next day, we are cleaning up after the day on the farm. We didn't get all the things accomplished with like volunteer tasks that we set out there. So I think another piece there is that goal and outcome. If all the other, you know, regular volunteers were like, day on the farm just makes a mess because that's the outcome the next day, versus day on the farm actually gave us this touch point with this many new community building, you know, partners, that has to be communicated across the staff, or what they judge the success and failure by is going to get put on you versus purposely set by you for what the program is supposed to accomplish.
I think with imagining these ideal outcomes, everything from day on the farm to, you know, first time someone steps foot in the door, your organization, mission, values, service to the community, that is your superpower. And each volunteer manager has that as well, or any person working with volunteer. Another superpower is your passion for that. So really, I think it's so important to keep in mind when visioning those outcomes and what you want, knowing that your organization and what you do, there are people out there that just cannot wait to be a part of it. It's that getting to them that is the main piece. But being confident in knowing that what you do and the great work that you are putting into the community, folks are here for that, and they really want to find you and make that connection.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that really kind of flows into sort of talking about some of these volunteer recruitment trends. You know, I would say number 8, the branded recruitment experiences, that could be incredibly diverse. Like, what is a recruitment experience? It could be something like a volunteer fair. It could be a virtual coffee, you know, chat. It could be a hybrid event, or it could be something like what my organization is doing with Day on the Farm. I would call that a branded recruitment experience. You know, everybody wears the t-shirt, and you know, people get to see the animals and things like that. So they really get to see, you know, what does this organization do? Who are these people? And what is this about? So I would say, you know, that really forays into, it's like what my outcomes are going to be like maybe where, you know, what I'm hoping to accomplish is going to be where I find which one of these trends is going to work, right? Because it's not going to be everything. for every organization. It might just be one or two of these things. So yeah, and I think too, Elizabeth, you spoke a little bit earlier about, offering something that's a little easier for people to get involved with. I know number 7, we talked a lot about micro volunteerism. That has been a huge trend. And in a lot of ways, it can really support recruitment. Don't worry, we have tons of supplemental resources on micro volunteerism. If you're just hearing that term for the first time, I just heard it for the first time earlier this year myself. So been doing a deep dive into what is going on with micro volunteerism, but it's really making things easily accessible for a quick connection point with your organization.
I think micro volunteerism to me is almost like a trackable word of mouth. We've talked about some of the easiest tasks are just having that advocacy role where they're going to spend 15 minutes, circulating something for you out into their social network, or they're going to do something very simple. But I think like a lot of this is taking what's been traditional and just putting the new technology spin on it. I think I was sharing with you guys the word of mouth one. My daughter dances. She doesn't really dance. My family is just historically klutzy, and I'm hoping this gives her a little more grace than I experienced in my life. But she thinks she dances. She's 8. So she has she came home with like a little dance card that's like friends who dance together, stay together. And on it had like a QR code for like, pass this to a friend that can attend class with your daughter for free and like be able to see what this is like. Very old school invitation had a QR code so that when I actually, because I was like, ooh, so I sent it over to her best friend that's been talking about taking dance, person to person, word of mouth. Her mom scans the QR code, and now we're using technology. It linked her straight into registering for the free class. Now they've got my friend and her daughter in their database. I don't know what will happen with that, but they had a fun time. They danced together. But I think like those simple, how do I start to think through a micro volunteerism piece, a word of mouth piece that I just need a new spin on? And I need to make sure that when I do it, I can measure it if it worked. How many people scanned that QR code and sent their daughters or sons into the dance classes so that we can say, okay, for spring, let's make sure we email them to let them know when our next class schedule opens up, because it's an intentional step toward a goal where I'm hoping I get this many responses that I can convert this many of them to fill in my classes for next year. That scheduling piece is just so interesting to me. And I don't know, Beth, if you guys had anything that you're like, these were interesting ways that we approached old challenges with new technology. I know that's one of the things that's always perking up my ear. And if anybody in the chat has like just a way they're doing something that's traditional in a new way, would love to see those starting to get shared.
Yeah, something that I always wanted to try, but it never happened to implement and put into action. But with that micro volunteerism lens, a recruitment ambassador. It's a fun title for someone that you're saying, hey, here are volunteer needs, or here are events coming up. Here's something exciting, and asking them to use their own network. And whether they're on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, wherever you might be, whatever your preferred platform is, sharing that as a person. Not necessarily as a professional with a social media title. It can be, anybody reaching out to their community and passing that word along, with the ability to share people's messages or, send them over in a DM and Instagram. There are a ton of ways to pass along that information. So that was always something that I wanted to try out, see what it was like. Would anybody be interested in having that role? Do you have 15 minutes in your week? Does it still bring you value? And then how could that help us expand our messaging? So a little combo of that micro volunteerism and then leveraging social media, turn it into word of mouth, really kind of combining those options.
We've talked about this
Absolutely.
before too, Court, where it's like the life cycle. So let's say that, there's something I've always loved doing, with one of your nonprofits. And then this year I can't do it. So it's almost like I just went from a great, yes, I'll be there as of last year, to no, I can't do it this year. But I still care about it. I still liked it. I still wish I could have been there. So those like simple snippets, like micro volunteerism, where I'm going to, I can't make it, but Elizabeth, can you invite 3 of your friends that you think would actually love doing this year in your place? So that your no's are never hard no's. You're thinking about the person's still passionate. They cared enough to tell me, oh, I can't make it. I hate that I'm going to miss it this time. How do I quickly pivot them into, great, well, you can be a social media micro volunteer for us and give them a better title like Beth did. So they're
Yeah.
not like, what? But that moment of like, that is so simple. And they were excited. Keep that passion, keep what you're doing. As you said, Beth, that's your superpower. What you're doing mattered to them. They want to keep helping. They just can't do what you're asking them for. So what could they do? Because they have to be remote now, or they can only have this much time. Yeah.
I would agree with that. And I think that the real secret behind the word of mouth recruitment is that you're intentionally asking your current volunteer base to spread the word. I know that a lot of times that feeling, I mean, I don't want to put that on anyone, but I have felt this where I've already asked people, and in my mind, I'm thinking I can't ask them for one more thing. But asking them to share is actually one of the easiest things that you can ask them to do. And I know, Elizabeth, you talked about an example one time where it was like there was a card and it was just, here's how you share. And, it can be that simple. And you never know, how someone else can find out about what you're doing. And actually, the network you already have is connected, I believe, always to everyone else you need. I really believe that, because it is community that makes our organizations move forward. So I really do believe everyone that's already there is connected to everyone else you already need. And so I think partly too, it's just that getting through that feeling of I've already asked these volunteers for too much and now I'm going to ask them to share. But if they're passionate just like you and they're passionate about your cause and they're showing up, I'm sure they talk about it already. It's just giving them a very specific way of having them talk about it, right? It's clarifying, like saying, hey, did you know we could use more people in this role? If you know anyone or anyone that they know knows anyone, tell a friend, because you never know how these things get passed along. I've had people just walk up to me in public and say, hey, I heard you volunteered at this organization. I'd like to help. And I thought, how do they know who I am? And it's because people had talked about it, that it had experiences. And I think like getting that specific is sort of something that's just like one of the other trends that's been really strong. And I really don't think is going anywhere. And if anything, I would say it's not a trend anymore, but it's just becoming standard best practice, is just to have easy online registration. People really want to be able to take action immediately in that moment where they feel passionate and they respond to what you're saying. And so being able to just have that link and getting them to go ahead and register as a volunteer with you. So we'll talk more about that too, like, finding ways to make that easier, so that you can really catch that wave of energy where that person is meeting you with what you have just shared about your organization. Is there anything else? Let's see, that we should talk about here. Promoting remote volunteerism. I think that's also sort of a little bit of a hybrid. You can easily promote remote volunteerism using social media. I also really love number 5. I know a lot of people are, it's tough in my job because I put myself on video, right? And that's very vulnerable. So I do want to recognize that. I manage that regularly. But what I will say is that using video to share about your program or for people to get to know you, it's a really effective way of supporting them and taking that next bigger step of like registering or walking through your door, right? So if there's any capacity or way that you can use video creatively, just to share things on social media or share things in your volunteer e-newsletter, I would say it's worth moving through the vulnerability like I do, to do it, because it's really a great way to begin starting that conversation.
That's about that, Court. Real quick, I'll just say, like, find that person who does love it. So if they are someone on your staff that is just constantly on their phone or loves grabbing the pictures and the little videos of you, like, make them your producer so that you can be maybe just filmed by them for a minute, but they're the ones that bring the excitement and the energy, and then that's their skill set. It's a great pro bono skill set to really tap into. Beth, what were you gonna say?
Absolutely. And I was going to tack on to that, saying photos too, having folks be able to see themselves in these volunteer roles. They're seeing other people in action and saying, I could do that. That could be me. I I think beyond the kind of practical recruitment aspect of it too, having a mini photo booth or something where a corporate group can take their picture after and, you know, share with their team, but also, you know, can you put it on your website to have folks say, oh, I didn't know that I could bring my work group with us here, or it looks like people are really having a good time. You know, you're giving them that experience, and you're also building your own resources that you can use to share just the joy that people are having when they're spending time with you as volunteers.
Yeah,
I like what you said,
absolutely.
Court, about like the people you need are already connected to the people you have. Like that always still hits me when I think about, like, there was a backpack program we took part in, and we had like the work Slack happen. My personal email happened from the organization. Then I saw on Facebook some of my friends that I hadn't, you know, on Facebook we just follow people forever. I hadn't like seen them in person for 2 years, and there they were doing the thing that I was signed up to do tomorrow. And it was just like every single media channel I had was coming at me with this program. And it was really fantastic to be like, wow, this is exciting. Look how many people are going to take part. But that wasn't organized. It wasn't planned. It was just that moment of the sharing through social media was hitting me in my personal channels, just like the ones that were planned, which was great, just reinforcement.
Yeah, and I will say, like, I enjoy social media as a tool for connecting. I know that sometimes it can be challenging to, you know, feel like you're doing it right or to have healthy boundaries with social media. We do have support for social media as well, for specifically for volunteer programs. We've got a webinar with supplemental resources that you can watch the recording of. We also have some really great written resources. But what I will say, you know, it can be like it can be a crunchy topic, I feel, but you know, no matter how we feel about it, it is here to stay, and it is how people connect. And it is how a lot of people stayed really connected through the, you know, some of the most challenging times of the pandemic. And so I think that really just kind of understanding that piece of that, this is just a channel for community and connection, and I'm focused on my cause. Like, that's how I try to think about it when I go into, you know, kind of thinking about these different things, because sometimes I feel like with digital tools, it can feel like everything's moving so fast. How can I keep up? So I'm just going to pick the things that work for me, and I'm going to really sink in there, right? Because if we try to do everything in our recruitment efforts, sometimes we miss out on doing, you know, anything. So really just picking, like, you know, maybe the 3 places that you're going to boost, or, you know, sometimes even it's figuring out what you're going to stop doing. Like, hey, it's not working. And I do have a resource for you that I'm going to email out on Monday. That's a planning guide that's going to help you identify some of those places. What isn't working, what needs a change or a shift, and then what is working and how can we boost that? So, okay, let's go ahead and start sinking in just a little more deeply into these volunteer recruitment common challenges and solutions. So I'm going to read through these challenges, and you all tell us in the chat, like, if these sound right to you, or are you feeling challenged with something else? But this is what we've really been hearing from our network. And that's, you know, thousands of volunteer managers. But I want to know from you who are here right now, you know, is this what you're feeling challenged with? So the number one challenge that we hear about a lot is just volunteer recruitment strategy. You know, because a lot of times that needs to be revisited. And so just having the you know, the ability to have time to step back, I think that might be a big challenge for a lot of us in the roles that we're in. Just really being able to schedule that time to step back, and really also to, you know, realistically evaluate the capacity for ongoing strategic efforts. That seems to be a big one. The second greatest challenge that we see is, you know, just really getting those systems into place for recruiting long-term volunteers. Like, how do we really get people plugged in so that everything is really smooth and cohesive? Like, we've recruited them, they're registered, they've onboarded, they're trained, and they're ready to start, right? So that when they've got that kind of life cycle going on, we've got engagement going on, right? So, and then again, those digital recruitment tools, social media, it's just, I think a lot of it is strategy and capacity for, you know, doing those kind of marketing like activities, and communicating consistently. Volunteer follow through would be the number 4 common challenge, just having that volunteer engagement strategy that really kind of boosts ongoing participation and thus your retention. So what happens after you've done all of this, you've completed all of this work and effort to recruit this volunteer? Are they actually showing up for anything, or are they just kind of a name sitting on a spreadsheet somewhere and we haven't really gotten them into an ideal opportunity for them yet? We haven't really seen them showing up yet. What is that follow through like? And then number 5 is having a volunteer recruitment strategy that's really got a targeted communications approach for very specific roles, like pro bono volunteers or targeted skill set volunteers. So now that we've talked about these common challenges, and again, you tell us in the chat, is there something else you're feeling really challenged with? This is what we've discerned from those we've polled, but we want to hear from you. So let's talk solutions, Beth and Elizabeth. So finding the time to implement a volunteer recruitment strategy. All right, let's talk about it. This feels like a big one for all of us.
I think, just the manageable goals. I think you could stop right there, because it's that moment of like, what can you do? How much time do you have? How many people do you need? Like, you got to be very goal specific so you can see if you met your goal or you didn't meet your goal. So you got to start there. But I think that there's one of the things that you were telling me about, Court, with a friend that just had a very specific goal, but it was a very constrained goal. So Court apparently has a friend that makes people do hard labor for 8 hours straight, and she couldn't get people to keep coming back year after year because no one wants to do hard labor for 8 hours straight. So I think, like that moment of what's my goal? I have to get somebody who can do 8 hours of hard labor straight, not just sign up. So that moment of kind of really understanding what is it I'm recruiting for, I think that part was so important because, I'll let Beth speak to the next part, but the word of mouth was very targeted. Once she realized that year after year, they weren't coming back or they were giving up after 2 hours, she needed a different approach because she needed people who were more on the side of I'll work hard for 8 hours than I care about your cause, because she needed people that could make it all 8 hours. So I'm putting this story in your mouth, Court, but I think, that ROTC approach, feel free to chime in with anything else, but she found a group, like those partnerships. So the word of mouth was strategic and a one-to-many. I want to bring out your ROTC students from this high school to work for 8 hours straight, and they're up for that type of work, that it got the job done. And her goal wasn't to recruit the ROTC to become her next great donors. It was to get the job done for 8 hours. So it's very targeted, very specific. I think that part misses us sometimes. We're thinking about quantity and not the quality of the person and the task that I have to tie together. So that's one of my 2 cents. I think, Beth, you probably have a whole different slant on this. So,
Well, in my roles as volunteer manager and current role now, I say one of the resources I cannot buy or get more of is time. It's finite. We've got, what can we do in that amount of time? So thinking back to having that role, reading this question, being like, yeah, great, would love to have some goals. And when will we be creating these? And when will we be working on our strategy? Mm-hmm. If you think back to those 2 initial stats of the impact and engagement of volunteers and those results, in addition to volunteers who become donors or engage in your organization in additional capacity, fight for your time. It is so valuable in this capacity to set yourself up for success. Volunteer engagement in your organization, no matter what size, is so important. So know that when you're looking at the idea of setting goals, you deserve that time. So moving past that piece of advocating for your time, I think good goals start with good questions. So starting to ask yourself, how is what I'm looking for going to influence my recruitment? So if I am looking for many short-term, quick engagement folks, then I'm casting a wide net and I am reaching out to maybe the high schoolers, middle schoolers, depending on my age range? Am I reaching out to faith-based organizations, corporate groups that have worked with us in the past? Really reaching out there, not being afraid of, sending out a mass email to give that information. When I am looking for someone with a specific skill set, a certain availability, it's about building that personal connection and making that intentional ask. Really thinking about, how can I reach out to people who may have that desire to make a longer term commitment, and being intentional about how you choose your approach. Is that a phone call? Is that an email? Really thinking about what your needs are. I think another big thing about manageable goals is knowing what your organization needs and being clear about that in your recruitment. There are fantastic people out there who want to offer their skill set, their time, their passion and excitement to your organization. If it is not a good fit, that can be a really hard thing to face with someone who came to you with this energy. You still have a need, but maybe that's not the fit for them. Helping them move on to something else can be really valuable as well. I think that kind of brings in a time-saving tool. Customer service and honesty, those expectations, letting people know what you need and trying to find that match from there. So, kind of asking yourself, what do we need here? What could we do? And how would we support our volunteers to start approaching all three of these solutions?
Yeah, absolutely.
The
Right,
time-saving tools part two, just to chime in a second there before we go on. But the
Go for it.
time-saving tools, I think you think about too, from what Beth was talking about, what am I going to do, 10 times this year? I'm going to do it on repeat. So I'm going to build it once and I'm going to keep using this over and over again. If it's something you're only going to do once, then it's having a goal for it, but not going so deep because it's only going to be used once. If it's not repeatable, don't over engineer it. I think that's important, and kind of moving from there.
There is nothing wrong with a good template that you can customize, that you can adjust for your needs. If it's going to save you time and still get a great result, I know folks can shy away from that sometimes because they feel like it isn't personal, but you can certainly build that foundation. Like Elizabeth is saying, build yourself a good foundation and then replicate it, repeat it, and adjust it so that it can serve you in different ways and maximize your time and investment.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of that. If you ever realize that you are writing what feels like the same email for the 25th time, that's a good indicator that it's time to automate something. Like if you feel that that is happening over and over again, I'm writing the same exact email from scratch. That is a really good indicator that you're ready for a time-saving tool that's going to help you automate your volunteer communications. So I usually tell people to look out for things like that. So let's talk about recruiting committed long-term volunteers. I mean, it feels like the dream. Tell us more, Beth and Elizabeth.
You go first, Beth. This is a hard one.
Yeah. It is definitely the dream. And I think it is an exciting achievement, not only for an organization, but as a volunteer professional who says, I have someone who's super committed to what we're doing here. I count on them, I rely on them, and they love being here. Yes, that's amazing. This flexible program piece, this really comes into play if you are starting to see your well run dry. Sometimes I would find, okay, every opportunity we offer occurs during business hours. No one else is coming forward to have this opportunity. I wonder why. Well, we completely tapped out the available pool of volunteers because they had to be available during the daytime. Now, of course, organization needs will always dictate your ability to do this. I do not want to suggest that you could just, oh, now we have weekend hours. That might not be a good fit for you, but can you consider, a 3-month commitment to get someone in the door, expand that to a 6-month commitment. Does everything require someone to be committed for a year? Of course, we want them to show up, be invested, but can we start, can something start smaller so folks can really try it out and then actively choose to further that commitment? So asking yourself of, how long should this really be? Does this support different skill sets and abilities? Am I asking everybody to be an Excel wizard, or am I willing to have someone who feels comfortable tapping around in Word? What are our needs, and how can we be flexible to speak to a variety of folks in our community? Don't sacrifice what your needs are for your organization, but where can you be creative to engage people who may not have been able to serve before? How can you bring in young professionals with that traditional, 9 to 5, 8 to 4:30 schedule, and get them serving your community and your folks? So that's something I encourage, is just, if you're hitting that wall for your long-term volunteers, where can you provide a bit of flexibility, either on a one-to-one basis? We love your skill set. We would be so excited to have you as a volunteer. You can't come in during the day. Is there something remote that you'd be willing to do? Or broader, we're changing the hours for this volunteer opportunity so more folks can attend. So I really think a lot about flexible programming and how that leads into, the success of the recruitment.
I love that, Beth, too, because it really brings up for me, when I think about developing flexible programming, sometimes an organization really needs people in there very in person for, these amount of hours, right? But then how could I expand some of my programming to also have an education or advocacy component, where I could get some of those people who have different schedules? They can participate by becoming advocates for the cause and educating other people, because then they can also recruit those people who could come in for the physical hours, right? Or how could they be an educational advocate, right? Like sharing more about this, because sometimes the reason people don't serve is because they might not even know that this is a cause. They might not know there's a way to do this. There are some challenges that we're all very aware of, and then some that we have to be educated on. And who knows who could become a passionate advocate for you or a passionate volunteer for you, until they learn about what it is that is needed. So, Elizabeth, can you speak a little bit to, communicating the value? That's something I know that you work on a lot with our network.
Yeah, and I think it's, just the phrasing was raising two different approaches in my mind, because you've got to, in a long-term relationship with a volunteer, communicate to them in a positive volunteer experience that what they're doing matters, even if they are only coming in seasonally. They have to see the value of what they're bringing. They have to see that the cause is being worked on, so that you keep in communication with them, even if they're not actively working with you, so that they become this long-term part of your program. And you don't see them, they did the spring event, we don't need them again till the fall, and we lost them in the summer because we didn't communicate or build any value with them over the summer. I think the other part is, Beth, you were saying it's a profession. You are all professionals here as volunteer managers, directors, coordinators coming in, and just like you want to grow in your profession, a lot of your volunteers are coming in to have valuable learning experiences, or just have value in their position. So I think it's partly just starting to break down for yourself, what is my goal for the year? How am I going to communicate to my organization's leadership that these are the professional markers I'm setting for myself to achieve, that I want to be seen this goal, this goal, this goal, and that measurable goal communicates the value of a long-term volunteer taking the place, frankly, of a paid employee. There's a huge value there that can be communicated to your board, to your leadership, to your investors, because you have literal volunteers that believe so much in the work you're doing that they're coming in to get the job done. So that moment of what is that person worth to our program? How do I show success myself that there's value to what we're doing and that these volunteers have their own intrinsic value, but then also talking to those volunteers so they see how valuable they are. I mean, we talk a lot about saying thank you and acknowledging just what they're doing for you, but that is so critical, because if I don't feel like I'm making progress or I haven't heard recently about the organization, then that moment of you're just slipping off their radar as other things that are talking to them are filling up that space. That is the downside of technology. The beauty of it is other things are always, we want to get involved and we see the newest, greatest thing. The downside is if you lose communicating your value, they are very easily distracted right now. So a lot of value approaches there. That's such a deep place that we can go into.
Yeah, 100%, Elizabeth. I think that communicating value is definitely twofold. What are you sharing with your volunteers to show their impact, to lift their spirits, to thank them, to show that appreciation, to really measure kind of that commitment, but putting it in a language that speaks to them. You know, when you think about collecting data, and sometimes that can be kind of an overwhelming piece for folks to think of, you know, how can you tell a story with what you're doing? One of the data snippets that I think I was most proud of in my previous role, we distributed food boxes to seniors. So they would come, they would pick up their box for the month, volunteers would hand them out. We would make sure that they were getting kind of those staples. And we could say, yep, we pass out, 2,000 plus boxes a month. That's great. We love our numbers. Look at this piece of it. When we flipped it to more of a story, we said there were over 2,000 meaningful moments between seniors and volunteers. And this was often peak pandemic, where maybe we weren't seeing other people around, but we still needed to have this service to the community. The thought of a meaningful moment versus a box really was able to communicate that value even further. Yes, that number is valuable for grants, reporting. It is a impact, it should be measured, but how can you adjust that for your volunteers? And then absolutely communicating the value internally. Having used a stat in the past, this is not for everybody and people can have most certainly feelings about it, but taking the volunteer total hours, dividing it by 8 for an employee and saying volunteers fill this number of hours, which would be this many full-time employees. This is how much their service is doing for their organization. And sometimes that's a valuable bargaining tool when you're saying, we'd really love some more social media support. Is there any way that maybe our communications folks can help us with that post? Seeing that we do create 20 full-time positions through volunteer service each year, right? So be proud of your number and your value and use that to elevate you as a professional, volunteer engagement as a profession, and that continued impact that you're making. So I find that value is, however you interpret it can bring more meaning to the organization and service.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Beth. And I want to kind of put a pin in this one, set your sights on positive volunteer engagement experience, because I kind of feel like it has a lot to do also with number 4 about volunteer follow through. And so we also got a couple of interesting questions and comments about that in the chat, but I want to be mindful of time and kind of keep us moving. So we'll put a pin in that and we'll talk about it on the next slide. Let's just talk as quickly as we can about this because I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Beth, I felt like you just made a really great point needing more airtime on the organization's social media. So sometimes, what we've seen too is that it can be that, maybe your volunteer program only gets a certain amount of exposure through your organization's social media. Some programs have found that having their own volunteer specific social media just for that one piece is really helpful in their recruitment efforts. But in general, getting some familiarity and some exposure on social media is really, really helpful. And really developing something that's manageable with using digital channels. You don't have to be on every digital channel. You just need to find the digital social media channel, whatever, that is working best for you and where your ideal volunteers are. And sometimes that could be as simple as surveying them, the volunteers that you already have, and ask them, where do you hang out online? And in the planning guide that you'll receive on Monday that I'll email out to you, it's going to have, just like really figuring out where are people finding us. And it might be email, it might be our website, it might be Instagram or Facebook, right? But focusing in on like the 3 places that are most effectively digitally for connecting with people, because it's just not going away. It is a part of our culture. It's a part of our world. It's how people are connecting. And so I think just getting comfortable and creating something that's manageable and just letting go of that belief that we have to do everything, just picking what works. And Beth, I'd really love for you to share. You had a great story from your previous role about setting up your website. And this has to do a little bit with like kind of getting that airtime on the social media. It was kind of the same for the website, and being able to recruit through your organization's website. So you could tell us just a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in a number of different organizations that I've worked in, we try and get real close with IT to make sure that our openings were updated on the website. It felt like as soon as we were able to get something posted, that opportunity would be gone or had already changed. So really running into the problem where folks were viewing out of date information, and a lot of time was spent saying, thanks so much for your interest. We've actually filled that position already. So having the intention of keeping as up to date as we can with our needs, but running into kind of that barrier. So when my organization was shopping for a volunteer management system, we did go with Galaxy Digital and Get Connected site. I really had the privilege of being able to set it up as a project manager. And one of the most valuable things was having one single link that I could send people to, having it put on the website where we didn't have to constantly update our openings, but instead could say, click here, everything will be up to date. And that was really a kind of life-changing experience to not have to worry about the timeliness of getting that information to people. Instead, they could seek us out. It was a lot less time posting multiple different needs on different sites. It was really saying everything you could want to find about our volunteer opportunities, they're going to be right here. So that changed our flow, our process, our time a lot. And it made it easier for both targeted and very general recruitment too, to just send them right to where they need to go, cutting out that extra navigation where you could definitely lose somebody along the way.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So let's talk a little bit about volunteer follow through. And you just spoke a little bit of that, cutting out sort of any places where you could lose them along the way. So really one of the biggest solutions I think that for this is, and this is maybe a little bit different than one of our questions that we got is, would you say that number 4, follow through, is different than volunteer stewardship? And if so, why? What are some tactics on the stewardship front that have been wildly successful, especially in a doers to donors capacity? And stewardship is just taking care of the volunteer relationship. This could be volunteer manager to volunteer, volunteer to organization or company, working with the volunteer manager, and volunteer specific programming. So I'll let you all go ahead and take that away.
Stewardship first, kind of different than what this slide is talking about. Yeah, I think stewardship is relationship. And I think, Beth, you've spoken about this. So I'm going to leave most of it in your hands for this question. But I do think it's that relationship. It's making sure that you're on a journey together. You're not asking someone for something beyond what they're ready for. So you're thinking about steps in a relationship and what are they passionate about? What are they skilled in? What are they willing to do? And then thinking about at that next step, some of the people may stay at that step, but some of your volunteers may want to go a step further, or they're going to stay at that step, but there's others in their organization because now you have that entry point via your relationship with that volunteer to an organization that might take a big step forward with you. So it's almost just thinking through and planning out strategy around, what are my relationships so they're authentic and they're real and they're truthful, because there's those moments where you do take someone to the last step they're going to go to, and you don't want to force them to another step because that forcing changes your relationship. But that moment of, again, word of mouth, thinking with them how they can advocate with you for more because you're in a relationship, opens up stewardship opportunities that are governed healthy relationships and governed relationships instead of ones that are forced on people. And I think that's just where my head always goes for when I start to feel like they're asking too much of me. It's hard to push back. So it's figuring out where is that relationship guardrail that I can feel like I'm asking her to join with me for the next step and figuring out, is that the right step for this person versus forcing it on them. I don't know, Beth, if you can clarify that with some real world, but that's always, as a volunteer, what starts to hit me when I'm asked to do too much too soon. It's where you freeze and you back up.
For sure, Elizabeth. I think that is super valuable to be in tune with the volunteer along the process and also be very knowledgeable about your own process. Create what works for you. Design that in a way that has checkpoints along the way where you're staying in contact, where you can be very clear with someone saying, this is our volunteer process. This is what you can expect to see at this step. After here, we'll go to this part of it. I'm going to ask you for a background check. Is that okay with you? Do you want to move forward with that? Really using that communication and relationship to move people through and walk through together. Like you said, not forcing that aspect, Elizabeth. And I think good customer service is clear boundaries and expectations. Letting someone know up front if this will be a match or not, still giving them that amazing experience and either welcoming them to your organization in another capacity, connecting with them on something for the future, or saying, I've got an idea of a couple other local places that you might be interested in, because we are here to help people serve in their community. Can you help them make a connection elsewhere so that they keep you in mind for their next experience and they're continuing their journey of, volunteer engagement. So I think that follow through is hand in hand with relationship and clarity, just being really clear, accessible upfront.
Absolutely agree with you. I feel like a lot of these solutions are helpful to reduce friction on the front end volunteer experience, and also, help keep me accountable to moving forward, right? And helping to automate some of those things, because if you are growing your program, at some point, it's challenging to do that one-to-one, right? So having some things automated reduces my friction or reduces me getting log jammed, which absolutely affects your volunteer engagement, your volunteer stewardship, right? Because you do want to be a positive steward of that relationship. And that does mean, keeping things moving forward with clarity and boundaries, just like Beth was saying. And this will be our last one here. We'll talk about it real briefly. Finding those pro bono volunteers, because we want to try and end right at 2. really targeting your recruitment messaging, knowing exactly who you're talking to and how you are reaching them. That is one of the best solutions you can have for finding those very specific targeted skill set people. If you're going to recruit, lawyers, you need people with legal advice. Maybe placing a recruitment flyer at, random community center isn't the most targeted approach you could take. Maybe you could just very specifically send a letter to, local law firms and things like that. Taking that concept, because it seems very obvious, and applying that to more programming. I think it's like sometimes we take the obvious thing and we forget to use that same principle in other places. And I think taking that and kind of applying it other places as well. And also investing in skill space. Yeah.
We
Go
got
ahead.
the question with how do you automate some of this? And I think the core to that question is when it's too much for you to do manually, because I think that example you gave, Court, is a very great strategic manual approach. Automation, and what we mean by automation is how do you, and it is management systems. I think as Beth said, there was a beauty to being able to have something so she wasn't dependent on IT and the website. This slide and the previous one, there's a beauty to automation when you can start to say, okay, how many of my people have already responded to something this month? I'm not going to email them. I'm going to email the people that responded last month and don't have anything this month. Or I'm going to look at the skills that they said they had, or that they told me they really loved doing this. And I'm going to send out a targeted mass email, but within my database of the people that told me they like to do this thing, or that they're available on Mondays, or that they have this. When you start to look at volunteer management software, and that is, Get Connected by Galaxy Digital, there's others out there. You have to find one that fits you for the level of automation and sophistication you need. We have multiple lines. There are other lines of other products, but it's really digging into when you hit those tipping points, supporting your profession with the tool you need to get your job done in a strategic, manageable, repeatable way. So automation is when you've reached that point that manual doesn't work and spreadsheets don't work, getting the software, and I think you, Beth, as you put it, advocating for your program and your funding so that you can start to have the tools and resources you need to automate some of this. So there are automatic notifications, there are next steps that are managed for you. That's where you start to hit that automation tipping point. So hopefully that helps a little bit. But as I think Nate has said in the chat, all of this is going to come out afterwards in a PowerPoint and slideshow and everything else that Court's going to be sharing. So don't worry if you missed any of it, and we'll hopefully keep getting questions from you. Court, did you want to?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I know we're right at 2 p.m. and I wanted to make sure that we still had just maybe 5 more minutes for our panel to stay on. Nate's going to drop in the chat exactly how to reach out to us if you would like to learn more about the work that we do with Get Connected volunteer management software and how we support recruitment efforts. So Nate's going to drop all that information in the chat. You can reach us at info@galaxydigital.com. And I just want to share that all of this is going to be sent out to you. You'll receive tons and tons of support. These are your 3 top takeaway actions. Just revisit your recruitment strategy. Look at that again and say, what can we do differently? What isn't working? What is working? And how do we boost it? Evaluate the journey of a newly recruited volunteer. Maybe ask some of your new recruits through a volunteer survey what the process was like for them, so that you can identify those areas of improvement or those areas of success and boost those, right? Sometimes we want to just find out not what's not working, but what is working and put more of our energy towards that. And again, finding a tool that works for you to streamline registration and other important points of contact. Because volunteer contact is, all of those touch points are exactly where you have that stewardship of the relationship, right? We don't want to just put somebody's name on an email address and tell them we'll get back to them and just never talk to them again. So part of that is, our own accountability, and how do we manage that relationship and treat it like it's, relationship that we value. And sometimes it just means that we need tools to help us because we are just one person trying to do the work of many, many people. And so we want to say, again, just a great big thank you to taking time to be with us today. We know how important your jobs are. We know how valuable your time is. And we are here for volunteer managers through our product, Get Connected by Galaxy Digital, our volunteer management software. And also just as a company, it's really what we think about every day. We think about you, we think about volunteer management and all of the challenges and solutions that, kind of come up and are necessary to face. So you can email us, you can check us out at galaxydigital.com. And is there anything else that you wanted to share, Beth or Elizabeth, before we? Thank you so much.
Yeah, I'm just really grateful for this opportunity. I love volunteerism, and equally I love the profession of volunteer engagement. And I just really want people to know how valuable their work is and how important what you do is to your community and the folks that you serve. So I just am really happy that people were able to come out, and hope you found some valuable information. And I love that we create resources for everybody, no matter what your setup is out there. If you're a spreadsheet or on the most complex volunteer management system, we want to share this with you because we're all doing better together. So there's my soapbox.
I couldn't say it better, so I'll leave that one there. And Court, you're showing us right now the new learning center. So
Yes, I wanted to share with those who were still here with us 5 minutes after our presentation, the new learning center that you all can access at galaxydigital.com/blog. And you can see down here, we've got volunteer management resources for really some of the top concerns for the volunteer managers in our network, and maybe for you too. So really encourage you to come and check those out, spend some time with us. We've got a whole library of videos to support as well. And you can search by topic. So I hope that you'll come spend some time with us there and learn more about who we are and what we do. And please do look for an email coming from us on Monday morning with all of your supplemental resources. Thank you so much for spending time with us. Again, we are Get Connected by Galaxy Digital. We create volunteer management software, and we're just so grateful for your time today. Thanks, Nate. Thanks, Elizabeth. Thanks, Beth. And thank you to everyone.
everybody, bye.
See you next
Bye.
time.